Before, Scott, you get into it, I
Yep.
guess one thing that might be helpful, Nico, what exactly is our goal for each of these? To agree on the category, or what is sort of, as I listen, what should I pay attention to, and what
Yeah,
decisions?
okay, good question. My goal is we're going to go through each lint and we're going to apply a category to it. So Ryan and Scott already put recommended actions, which mostly fit the categories, but not entirely. And those cases where they don't fit are kind of interesting, and we could look at them. But we're going to apply a category to it, and see if that feels good.
And people all have the idiom lints document open, right?
I do.
Yes.
I don't know about everybody else.
Cool.
Also, apologies, listeners. I forgot to start the recording. Go on, Scott.
So this is din trait. I think everyone here is pretty familiar with that. The proposal I put for this one is that this should be a hard error in the new edition because there's a bunch of ambiguity that comes out of not having dyn and having to do the compiler, try one thing and then try the other thing. So this was originally proposed for improving const generics errors because A plus B, it cannot be a type if din is required. So it can actually talk more reliably about that's not a, those are traits. You can't pass traits to a type generic, or it can say, hey, you need braces around addition if you're doing a const generic. There's a couple of links to other things as well about if you try and use traits in fairly normal ways of getting methods off of the trait, if you typo things or or a couple of other different things like that, the compiler has to then go and look for associated items on the trait object, which I think is very rarely what people want. There might be some exceptions for like din any where people are actually trying to get something off any, but
leaving apart the rationale, or I'm just trying to keep us moving. I don't know. I'm curious if I feel like people probably. I'm wondering if anyone disagrees, but also I wanted to ask you about your proposal. You had written migration. Would you call this a soft deprecation and then an addition error?
Let me look at the title.
That would mean warn in 2018 and earlier.
It's
and
soft deprecation then addition error.
And the reason for
so it's already soft deprecated.
Right, it's already soft. Okay.
I don't have a particularly strong feeling on soft versus hard for this one.
My feeling is hard is something we would use only if it's like actively likely to be a bug. But I would like to, that's another thing I'd love to kind of zero in on is our instincts and why we would ever, like why would we use hard versus soft? I agree with soft here. This feels like we want to push people, but we don't have to shove them.
I think that hard seems like something we would use when it's not just a matter of like, we want to make this better in a new edition. There was some horrible problem, and if we could go back and make it so that we never did this in the first place, we would. And this is the next best thing as we migrate new code bases.
Yes.
So
I wrote some criteria
actively causing, like, it's easy to slip into a soundness problem or other kinds of things, and you're carrying a running chainsaw by the wrong end if you try to use it.
Yeah. The reason I just wanted to say that in the RFC, the draft RFC, I wrote extreme danger of misuse or unsoundness, or third-party tooling may wish to drop support for this pattern. That was a little bit of the last one was a little bit of an interesting question.
Yeah, the thing the vague thing I've said in the past is if it's still worth running the unit tests, it doesn't need to be hard.
I don't understand that. What does that mean?
That it can be a warning that warnings for extra parentheses or not having your dyn or something like that is okay because it's likely that it's worth bothering actually running your unit tests. Whereas if you have an overflowing literal, it's probably not worth running your unit tests because it's going to do something that's so much not what you expected it to do.
Yeah. Okay, we're at 5 minutes. Does anyone object to soft deprecation addition error here?
So to confirm, this will warn in 2018 and hard error in current edition.
And hard error in 2021. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I think you said soft deprecation. That doesn't line up. What categories are we putting this under? Is this?
So it's both a soft deprecation and an addition error.
Okay, and also I guess repurposed syntax potentially if it's.
I guess maybe. I don't know.
But
That's
doesn't
not
make
part
it
of the lint
more
here.
strict, right? Yeah.
It does, yeah. Exactly. For the purposes of this discussion, the distinction between error and repurposed is moot. I'm not sure if it's ever important to draw a distinction, but
Oh, I guess I would have expected that between the two. I guess that this table is a little bit surprising to me in that I would have thought repurposed syntax we would have had the warning in addition and not the opt-in, because you want people who might be transitioning to for sure know if their code might take on a new meaning. But
I don't think you want them to know that until they start to transition. That was like they don't necessarily have to know that. If they do, I guess the point is this: if they do, then it's probably also a deprecation or something else. Like my go-to example for that is closures. I don't want to give warnings to people who are using the old meaning of closures where there might be a change if they migrate, because what can they do about it anyway? It doesn't make any sense, right? But if they were using an ambiguous path that's going to potentially change meaning, and we'd rather that they use a more explicit form, that's kind of actually a deprecation.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so the idea there is that when people transition editions, they should first opt into all the new lints rather than just switching the edition over and seeing what breaks.
Yeah, yeah. There's a step. Transitioning is, you follow a series of 5 steps, the first one of which turns those things on automatically for you.
Sounds good, thanks.
Okay.
The edition guide mentions running cargo fix twice, once for the pre stuff, and then once afterwards.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, and let's go to elided lifetimes and paths.
I think this one's going to be a more complicated discussion than some of the others. This one is not enabled by default in 2018 right now. This is, you need to syntactically mark everywhere that has lifetimes in your types when you write them. I think everyone agrees that this is a good thing for lifetimes that participate in tying lifetimes together in elision. There is a bunch of conversation on the tracking issue about how valuable this is for arguments that do not form lifetime relationships between things. So I put down in the proposed resolution as I think can't be migration because currently as allow is not applicable anymore with the categories having changed. So as a starting point for the discussion, I put it should be denied by default for lifetimes used in elision, which is essentially equivalent to anything in the return type, as well as for anything that ends up using the same lifetime as what's in the return type and then warned by default for the other ones. But I know at least Nico thinks that this should be required everywhere. So if you want to talk, Nico.
Well, actually, what I feel strongly about is that it should be, if I had my druthers, I would certainly at least warn everywhere. I don't necessarily feel the need to make it a hard error anywhere, at least not at this moment. I think splitting the lint could well make sense, but I would also be happy with just soft deprecation. For me personally, I think Rust code will be better if people are identifying their lifetimes. I know why people don't like it in argument position. I find it very useful to have that indicator there personally. But
I find it useful as well, and I would go as far as it is useful when reading other people's code, but it's also useful when being forced to include it in my own so that I'm aware that there is a lifetime there and not just getting it right by accident.
Yeah, it's very much when reading other people's code that I notice it the most, because people come to me with a question like, why am I getting this lifetime error, right? And without those symbols, I can't figure out. It takes me a lot more work. If those things are there, I usually can tell them in 2 seconds, which tells me
nice
that it's important.
And it's nice for the error message to have something to point at too.
Also true.
I'm gonna voice perhaps not interestingly sort of light dissenting opinion, which is I think over influenced by the number of times I've written and mute context single quote underscore. And I think that is a specific example in which the fact that like context contains lifetimes is not particularly interesting or revealing to the person writing that code, and it's just sort of repetitive and noisy and makes everything kind of awkward. But I don't actually think that necessarily indicates a problem in the language. I think it might just be that that's annoying to write and I should deal with it.
I feel the opposite about that example. Like that's exactly the case where I would want it, because if I don't know that it has it, people are going to be doing something like storing context into their struct, or they'll, if in my head, when I'm looking at the code, if I see that it has that parameter, I sort of think of it as bound, and I know I can't like stick it in an arc or do other things with it.
Yeah, so I can say a little more. The reason it feels annoying is because I feel like I know that already, and having to repeatedly tell the compiler that I do in fact know that is annoying.
Yes, I accept that.
From a like, it sort of ties in with the whether or not you're designing an API for sort of like people who are sort of expert, familiar users with the API versus designing things for people who are sort of newcomers first reading things. I think this is a case where that isn't actually sort of a positive sum thing. I think like I have a really hard time imagining anyone who was like who is a frequent user of the like manual futures APIs trying to store a context, because that's just so like not how the API works.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think a lighter syntax, I don't know what it would be, but might be an option. But
this isn't necessarily like to say that I think that we should do a different thing here. I'm just expressing that this was painful for me.
Yeah, I hear that.
There's the example a bit higher as well of the formatter in things like debug and display that was one of the things that people pointed out as like, yeah, I know, yeah, there's a lifetime there. I so don't care. I've never had a problem with this lifetime ever.
Right, you never try and store the formatter. That doesn't make any sense.
I actually have. But
really? Yeah. Oh, okay. Never mind.
The same with context. I haven't tried to store context, but I feel like my brain might do it when I'm like, I just get in this mode. Maybe it's just me, where I'm like thinking about the transformations I can make, and it's kind of divorced from the types. But
so, I have a question, Taylor. Do you feel like that concern would be mitigated if the syntax were not 4 punctuation characters with varying amounts of shift in them? If there were a simpler syntax, would you be happier with that?
I, as someone who has had to type that a bunch, would prefer not to have to type that, and something that was easier to type would be nice. But also, I don't know that from a language perspective, I particularly like the idea of introducing a new thing there, right? I think that it like the way that we're spelling this now is consistent with the rest of the language and makes sense, and is like, I don't know, I'm kind of sold on that. That's a good way to do things, and that my sort of gut reaction is that I would not be in favor of introducing sort of a new way to spell that, but it is kind of unfortunate.
Is part of your implication, Josh, that an IDE, better like autocomplete support could be part of the answer here?
As a general rule, I don't tend to feel that IDEs solve language problems. They can help people use the language more easily, but we should design the language for both IDE users and non-IDE users.
Okay, since you specifically brought up keyboard, patterns, I figured IDs were relevant, but I
I was
understand. It
only
makes sense to
bringing it
say
up
it's.
because I wanted to understand Taylor's objection more. Like, is it noise in seeing it, or is it having to type it? And could either or both of those be addressed by syntax abbreviation?
Yeah,
So-
so to answer your question, I think it's both. And I think that there's a reason why, like, for example, ref, like in the ref example above, like the ref, quote underscore looks reasonable to me and not like is understandable to type. But the like animute formatter and the context ones, the ones in which there's already a reference in front of it, are the ones where it just feels like, and then you're only introducing generics to add an extra quote underscore, are the ones where it just feels especially awkward to me.
I'd like to move on because I think we could rat hole here for a long time. Do we want to table this one for more discussion? Do we want to talk, like I see three things on the table. Soft deprecate as is, or split the lint into two and soft deprecate the return position and continue discussing argument position. I'll note that soft deprecation is not tied to the addition. So like we don't have to do this now.
Yeah, I'm also happy to close, like, I think I was just sort of stating a pain point, but I'm also sort of happy making a decision here that totally goes against what I just said. Basically, I'm fine saying that this is sort of like the cost to be paid for having this increased clarity. So
I would also point out that a soft deprecation is to use Amazon speak, a one-way door, meaning like we can change it. We can add more syntax to make it easier. We can roll the deprecation back if we.
What would people say to asking for if some contributor would be interesting in splitting the lint? Do people think that there's a reason that it would be valuable enough to do that?
I would be in favor of splitting the lint. I'm in favor of splitting the lint no matter what we decide, because I want people who feel really strongly to be able to allow one and not the other. Like if I can't get them to write tick underscore everywhere, at least I can get them to write it in the return position where it's most important.
Yeah, I will say that I feel similarly to Taylor, where in the return position and in cases where I don't already have like an amute or an ampersand in front of it, then I'm like all the happier to write the tick underscore. But if I like for formatter, I don't know, it looks noisy to me. And I hear you, Nico, that it's helpful, but I don't know. I think splitting the lint seems like a great way to move forward. Because I think we have consensus that return position should be soft deprecated.
So let's just write it out though. We're going to split into return position and argument without and not under a reference. Is that the plan?
So my original one would be you absolutely need the tick underscore if it's participating in lifetime elision.
Right. So I guess that's like return position. It's really what I meant. But
I mean that it would happen for input position as well if you had something like ref to ref.
that doesn't happen in. Oh. I don't understand.
Okay. Type.
This ref. Yeah, why don't we just give examples? That's probably the most concrete thing.
So that one I typed.
Okay, I see, I understand.
I think that one, it's very important
I
that
see.
the lifetime is visible in the argument because it's participating in lifetime elision.
I agree. Okay, I agree.
Complete agreement. Yeah, I would love to see this one go as far as deny in the new edition by default. The other, I would love to see at least warn, but I'd be happy with just warn and not necessarily full deny. So having them separate seems valuable.
Why don't we split them? Let's definitely split them. I think that's the right split personally, and not. Well, I guess the question, the one ambiguous. So there are like 3 cases, right? That are interesting, and I'm curious, Taylor and Mark, as the people who. Well, okay. This case, as right. Do you feel differently, Taylor, Mark, as the representatives of this school of thought about ref versus ampersand ref?
Yes. I don't know. I guess in both of those cases, in the I don't know, can we like number them? That
Yeah.
would help talking. So in case 2, I think I want the tick underscore just because it's like it actually is important that that thing has a lifetime and it's not like a copy type or something. But in the case of an ampersand, I don't actually like. I feel like it's sort of covered because there's no there's not that lifetime is not actually being used in some sense.
I would support that playing into the split insofar as case 1 and case 2 are the ones where I would love for those to be deny in the new edition. Case 3 is the case where I would be happy with that just being worn and people being able to say, I want that to just be allow. So I do think that that is the appropriate place to handle the split.
Yeah, I mean, I
So-
both think that I agree with everything that Mark just said, and also I don't know that I actually want to make this distinction, like in my own code. Like I think as a newcomer coming to the language, it would be really confusing to try and intuit these rules and figure out where the compiler is going to warn at me and where it wasn't. Especially since like I basically always use deny warnings in my code everywhere. So basically, I don't think I actually want there to be a distinction between the cases, but there's one case in which it feels noisy and another case in which it doesn't. And I think that aligns with what Mark said.
Yeah, I actually wanted to mention that I am against case 3 being worn. I think we're not there yet.
So I put that random thought section above earlier when Taylor was talking, and he sort of got to the same thing I was pondering there. I don't have a good answer for why this would be the case, but it seems like all the examples that we had of things that people were particularly annoyed about were like a lifetime inside another lifetime in some sense. I don't know what that means, but
I think that that's totally the right thing, and that's part of what makes it feel noisy is that already isn't a thing that I would be like storing or swapping out because I already have it like
It's already borrowed, yeah.
I'm already borrowing it. I think though that logic feels different maybe if I have an and mute of something, because then it feels like I can store to it if it doesn't have a lifetime in it. And
that's an excellent point.
Feel like I can store to it if the inner thing has a lifetime in it. But that means that sort of my context example falls apart, right, in terms of a motivating case.
I think we got to move on. We're not quite, we don't seem to be at a consensus. That's okay. We'll revisit this.
Actually, I'd be happy to support that statement. If we split out mute, then case 3, I don't mind leaving as allow. It'd be nice to have a thing that you could opt into in a code base, but I'm happy supporting that consensus. 1 and 2 and 4 should be deny. 3 should be allow.
I feel a little bit uncomfortable with, I haven't yet decided how I feel about like the point that Taylor made that hasn't been listed in this description is how are we going to explain to people when they're supposed to write tick underscore and when they're not. I think the lifetime elision tie is explicable. I feel a little bit, I don't know.
Yeah, that's why I was going to raise that with the 1 and 2 together, because 2 is not tying lifetimes in the way that was my intent with number 1.
Right. Yeah, you're right. It's kind of complicated. Well, I feel like, yeah, at that point we have to explain it's under an ampersand or not under.
Yeah. I really dislike how heuristicy this is, and I know that like my brain is heuristicy, and so
Right.
Like the places where I'm gonna find it useful are gonna
Right.
be some sort of like weird, kind of not really logical set of rules, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think that the language should actually try and mirror what
Yeah.
my brain is doing there.
Yeah.
Because I think that the like sort of rules of where it feels good are kind of too subtle and complicated.
Well, I
For
think the rule
especially for
may
new
feel
users.
I think the real rule might feel complex because we're trying to positively define here are all the cases where we deny or warn. And I think that the surface area and the boundary case comes across much more simply if you say you always need to show the tick underscore except in this case, in which case there's only one case where you don't, where it is a type with a reference that is covered entirely by a reference and you're not referencing that lifetime anywhere else.
That's a good point.
There's only one case there as opposed to here are 3 cases with slightly different rules. But if we're just saying this is a special case where you're allowed to omit the lifetime because it's kind of obvious.
But it's going to also be and in a function argument list. Anyway, I really do think we should move on. We'll never get through.
Sure.
Okay, let's come back to it. Ellipsis inclusive range patterns. What's the current status on this?
It's a warn right now, I'm pretty sure.
So I think when you say migration, what you mean is soft deprecation.
Addition error
Addition
is,
error.
I think, what I mean.
Like we're not going to stop it from warning. So
I'll just double check.
So
It is warned.
2018
It is warned by default.
deny or hard error in 2021.
Hard error.
hard error is
Okay.
what I wrote here.
So that we can reclaim ...
Just because it's, you know.
Yeah, and it's so we can reclaim ... and it's been quite a while.
Yeah. And it didn't exist for very long.
Well, that's not true, but it existed for the whole history of Rust up until it didn't, but it's okay. I don't argue with it. I think it's an interesting example. But I think it's the right outcome, and I want to ponder why later.
I think it goes back to the conversation of why would we have a deny for something that's syntax, and I'm inclined
Yes.
to agree on
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah.
If it's as simple as it's a lexical change that's obvious to a regex.
It's also interesting to me that I wouldn't want it to be a deny by default in earlier editions. Maybe I do. I guess that's the question I have. Like, there's an argument in favor of hard deprecation and addition error, or like making it deny by default in earlier code, in that it's, yeah, the argument is basically to push towards one Rust, but I think the counter argument, which I think is that it's more important that people aren't disturbed. So I take it back. I already know the answer. It should be soft, and we value existing code keeps working more than we value one Rust.
At least for something that's very likely pervasive.
Right, and really that's not that important.
If I can offer, I don't know if we're trying to get through these real fast, but I guess to offer a quick, like briefly dissenting opinion, I think the interesting distinction between hard error and warning comes for, especially in particular, new users first coming to the language, in terms of like what things they learn that they're allowed to write in Rust. And so having something deny teaches people, no, that's not how you spell it, versus warn is like, oh no, you kind of might want to change this.
Yeah, but that's a really good point. Addition error does sort of, on a slower time scale, move us in that direction, right?
And I guess that's just to say that I think I would be in favor of deny by default on 2018 for this one, but I'm fine with not doing that.
Yeah, it's sort of warn 2015, deny 2018, and then hard error 2021.
This sounds too complicated. Like, why would we do that anyway? Yeah. Okay.
I think it's reasonable in design for us to assume that new Rust users will start out using the latest edition unless they specifically are going to work on an existing code base. So if they show up and start writing their own brand new Rust code, they're going to get this guidance already. And if
Yeah.
they show up writing in an existing project, then they need to follow the standards of that project. And if that project has not deprecated this and is not moving to the new edition right away, then I don't think we necessarily need to start giving them that warning.
Yeah. I also think it's a little heavy-handed and don't totally agree with the premise that people don't see the warning and know it's not the thing to use. Like, I think if we say something like, you know, this syntax is deprecated, try this, I don't know, they will. Especially if they're learning.
I definitely have known like new users to come to the language and like allow warnings by default in their project so that they don't get so much compiler spew.
Yeah, okay.
But that's
Fair enough.
I think some
guess-
of that may be cultural from specific environments as well. If people got used to a compiler for which warnings are high false positive things, such as certain C compiler warnings, for instance, they are used to the idea that your code may have warnings and you don't, scrupulously fix every one of them or turn them all off. And in Rust, we try very, very hard never to have any false positives in the compiler. If we have false positives, we say, hey, that belongs in somewhere like Clippy. We may want to consider some guidance or education or similar in general to make it clear to people we don't do false positives. Warning free code is a perfectly attainable goal that you should be striving for.
All right. I agree. Let's move on. I really want to get to more actual lints.
Ryan, do you want to pick up the next one?
Explicit outlibs requirements, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as you can see, this is basically when you have a generic argument that's behind a lifetime already or referenced with a specific lifetime. It's, of course, clear that that generic argument has to outlive that reference. And right now you can write that explicitly, but there's a allow by default lint currently. Should we make that warn?
I think it should be soft deprecated once the bugs are fixed, but I don't think it should be tied to an omission.
I'm just curious though, do we have other instances of things that are technically correct but are kind of redundant that we warn against by default?
Dead code.
Dead code.
We're actually pretty strict about telling people to remove random and simplify unused, for example, unused imports. It feels similar to those things to me. Sort of your code is cluttered, it could get less cluttered.
That's fair.
I don't have a strong opinion about it. I would also be okay just removing this line.
This
Maybe-
only applies if the only use is a borrow, and if you have some use of T that is outside of a borrow of T, then you do have to still say this, right?
You
Yes.
don't have, you only have to say this if there's a limited set of scenarios where you have to say it. I think it has to do with trait objects or something. I forget, mostly an impulse.
I think I agree with the stated consensus here, although I do sort of wonder about whether or not we would start applying the same logic to implied bounds in the future. And that feels like that would start warning on a whole heck of a lot of code.
I think the reason, this is actually an interesting example, actually. This might be a good example of where you would want an addition specific level, in the sense that this, if those things only became redundant on a new edition, which actually we probably wouldn't do, but if we did, then I feel like you might want that in order to help people migrate, right? Like the main reason to have that lint that would affect a whole bunch of code is so that we can automate you cleaning up your code.
This is also one of those things, I guess not this one, because it's probably been this way for long enough, but if someone's trying to support old Rust versions, they explicitly don't want to remove this condition, right?
Right. That's a good point.
I'm guessing this would never be on track to be hard error ever, right? Like we'd always be
No.
able to allow this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would
Yeah,
never be a
okay.
harder.
Yeah.
I'm just
It would
making
be
sure.
pretty
Okay.
inconsistent with, we allow like redundant and
Yeah.
even things that
Okay.
can't possibly be true.
Yeah, similar dead code. Like,
That
I'm the kind
argument,
of person that likes to make explicit declarations. That's why I'm looking at this saying, I want to be able to keep doing this. That's fine. Okay.
so do we want to say resolve warn by default, soft deprecate, or do we want to just leave it? I kind of go either way. Scott's
feel-
argument was strong to me.
I feel like we
MSRD.
should personally leave it until the bugs are fixed and then revisit.
Yeah, I sort of agree.
But once the bugs are fixed, I'd be in favor of warn.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel yet, which is why I don't want to warn by default now.
I think it sounds like the decision is not 2021 edition specific.
For sure, it's not.
Do it outside of do it outside of that process.
It's definitely not to do with edition. Yeah, definitely. Unused extern crates. It's allow now. There's some bugs. Can you remove this in any edition or only in 2018? I forget.
We have mostly backported some of the compatibility for the path clarity into 2015.
I know that, but I don't know whether we backported this case. I think we did.
so there are cases where you explicitly want use proc macro as underscore. It wouldn't be proc macro in that case, but where you want to link in the crate for side effects, and we would guide people towards that in those cases.
Is that a question or a statement?
That's a question.
Okay.
I'm asking, like, what by default, just removing, like, if we had a Rust fix for this, like, just removing extern crate isn't correct, right? It's not unambiguously correct.
Is that what the bugs are saying? There's false positives.
I haven't looked at the links, but I like, if you link in anything that depends on like specifying an allocator, for example, extra, like having it be imported for no effects is still a thing you want to do.
At least one of those seems to be related to that, yeah.
I just dug into that. It looks like part of that was fixed. For example, if you're providing a panic handler, then you're exempted from some of that. But yes, I think that those issues are being fixed. Not all of them appear to be done being fixed.
This maybe is
But,
extra. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yes, we should be steering people towards use crate as underscore in cases where we where people do want to link something in, even though they're not visibly using something.
It appears to me that you do need this on older editions, at least 2015. When I mess with the playground, it doesn't compile if I just write like use regex, but it does with 2018.
I guess one question I have, it's not clear to me that I would want this on an addition boundary in the sense that like we warn on, you know, unused functions or whatever. Like we warn on almost everything that's unused already. And in cases where we can detect for sure that the thing is unused, it seems like I would sort of just want it to happen. Like it's not clear to me that I would want an addition related change for this.
I think the only way it's edition related is if you're in an older edition, we shouldn't warn you. Like,
right, but then it's used, so it's like
yeah, exactly. I agree. I don't think this is edition related, or like it should just be warning when it's correct to warn you. If you could literally remove it, we should warn you. Basically, or you could write as underscore, whichever.
Right. We should also warn if we can tell you, please change extern crate foo to use foo as underscore.
I don't think we should do that on that. I feel like we should do only on a new edition, personally.
Agreed.
Why?
Because it is useless noise. Like if I don't know, if I have a bunch of extern crates, and in theory I can replace them with underscores, but like, do I like it's a change I have to make, and if I get a warning about it, I'm going to be annoyed.
That's a new category. It's not. It doesn't fit any of my categories. That would be an idiom lint, I guess.
Well, I feel like what we're saying is it's actually repurposed syntax, but it's just repurposed syntax in 2018, personally. Like we're repurposing extern crate to not exist in some sense.
But we're not actually doing that. Like the syntax still works.
Sure,
So-
but I mean, like that's the category that I would put it in some sense. But anyway, maybe we
Okay.
should not.
No, I think that's kind of what I'm looking to get out of this discussion. Is like, is there a category we want to consider of idiom lint, and when would we actually want it? And it sounds like you're arguing yes, there is. When we want to, we essentially want. I don't quite buy it yet. I guess that's the question. It feels like a soft deprecation.
I think actually maybe a better term for this is that what I want is for the compiler not to warn me, but if I want to, I can run cargo fix with some flag and it'll do some of these like cleanups automatically.
I feel like that applies to a whole bunch of stuff. Like I might want that for like.
Sure.
dead
Yeah.
code.
I think
don't
this
know.
gets back to some of the discussions we were having on edition channel about like maintenance status and so forth. So in any case, I don't know. I don't think spending this meeting is necessarily useful.
Yeah, it's okay.
and I
We're
don't
almost
know
at the
what I
end of the
feel like.
meeting, but let's move on. But I would like to note somewhere that, did we resolve this? No. We seemed like we resolved for if you could delete it, we would, and it won't cause bugs. We would be good for linting that, but we stick to our please don't have false warnings policy.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So not addition related, in favor of warning if we know it will work. This implies cannot warn on Rust 2015.
Sorry, when you say not addition related, like it is addition related in the sense that in 2015, extern crate is.
Yeah, and I mean that we don't change the status. It's nothing to do with Rust 2021 edition is maybe the way to say it, and it's not something where we would phase in a stronger error based on the addition.
Yes, just whether or not the extern crate is in fact needed depends on the addition.
Yes.
Yes, agreed. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So all right, we have 4 minutes left, which probably isn't enough time, but we'll tackle one more. Unreachable pub. It's allow now. It's got some false positives, I guess, and I'm not sure. I think that might be arguing like sometimes this is a useful pattern that you can't do another way or something.
I have at least one case where I actively used this. Concretely, I had another crate with a macro that defined items and it hard-coded pub, and I didn't want to export those from my library. So the easy fix until the upstream crate was fixed was to wrap it in a private module.
That feels like that case is, well, that at least argues against hard deprecation or error. Yeah. The
Right, I
question
wouldn't
is,
object.
I would never go
strongly if
stronger
I
than
had
warning
to
for this.
Right, if I had to allow a lint in order to do that, that would not be shocking. But it should never, I don't think it should be deny, and I don't think it should be hard error.
I definitely agree it's not an addition issue.
This definitely feels also kind of like the extern crate we just discussed, where the pub, if it's like unreachable in some sense, it's unused, right? For like that subset, I think.
Yeah.
A warning.
I think I would be in favor of a soft deprecation.
Yeah.
We just have to work through, well,
Yeah.
it's a good example where like the pattern for sealed stuff, where you want to have something that can't be named, but is still public. A, I think that pattern is weird, but B, I personally wouldn't mind an allow in that case of that pattern because I feel like it's worth a comment. That's usually my rule of thumb personally. An allow is okay if it's worth a comment.
I kind of wish we just had syntax for sealing, but you know.
Right, that would be even better. But,
We really should, yes.
Okay. That sounds fun.
I'll point out that this is an interesting overlap with Josh's earlier comment about that we won't give you warnings based on sort of false positivity heuristic stuff. And this is something that people like do. I think the consensus here is correct.
Yeah, I feel like what I just said is in contradiction with things I've said elsewhere, so I'm mulling over that. I would like to have some rule for like what is a false positive, right? What is, and it's not as simple as false positive. That's
yeah, I feel like
simplistic.
false positive is the wrong like thing to say. It's not that the lint is wrong. It's the lint is saying you're doing something really weird. Are you sure you want to do that, right?
Which sort of gets back to that's what Clippy says often.
But
Well,
yeah.
in the
I think
case
there's
where
just different ways to work around the lint.
Sure.
We need,
When I said false positive earlier, I didn't mean like you could never possibly write this in legitimate code. I mean that this doesn't flag anything we didn't want it to flag. It might be that it's correct, technically correct code, but we did intend to flag it with this lint, and sure enough, we are.
not sure that's what everybody means, but
Fair.
yeah. All right, this was helpful. I think next steps are going to be, well, I think we have to go, it seemed like there wasn't, for the immediate deadline of the edition, there wasn't that much. And I'll try to incorporate this into the policy that I put up and floated around. I'm not sure yet.
Might be worth scrolling through any of the things that we were trying that made sense to look at if any of these are actually addition tied and bring them up maybe on Zulip.
Yeah, I will do that too. The only one clashing extern declare. Oh, I guess I didn't get all the way through in my table. Yeah, I'll do that.
Well,
there is at least some that say that they're addition tied, like type alias bounds. But all right. Ciao, y'all. Thank you for attending.
Thanks. Bye.